Welcome to A Year in the Bible with Daily Grace. My name is Kristen.
And my name is Katie, and we want to spend a few minutes a day with you walking through the New Testament, one chapter at a time. This year, we will fix our gaze upon Christ so that we may know him, not only with our minds, but with our hearts.
Together, we will learn that who Jesus is changes everything.
Hey, welcome back to A Year in the Bible with Daily Grace. My name is Katie, and it's my joy to walk with you through Hebrews in our year-long study of the New Testament. Today, we are studying Hebrews 2. As always, you can follow along with the Behold studies in the Daily Grace Co shop or with the reading plan linked in the show notes. I want to start off today's episode by asking you some questions. How far would you go for those you love? What kind of sacrifices would you make to show your love for those around you? How much time would you give up? Pain would you feel? Humiliation would you go through for them? It's easy to think that we would give up so much for those that we love and those that love us. But how far are you willing to go for your enemies? Those that cause you deep pain in your heart? How would you sacrifice for the people that have done you wrong? Maybe you wouldn't give as much. Maybe you would not give anything at all. This is the gravity of the gospel. Jesus gave it all for us, his former enemies, people who have constantly sinned against him. Yesterday, we talked about the elevation of Jesus over angels. We have seen his superiority since the beginning of time and will continue to see it forever. We talked about the importance of the Old Testament scriptures cited all throughout Hebrews chapter 1. The author of Hebrews continues to cite Old Testament scriptures throughout the entire book. The author does this to show how Jesus remains superior to anything his audience may be tempted to place their confidence in. The first section of Hebrews, chapter 2, starts like a narrator breaking through a fourth wall. In chapter 1, the author was providing a foundation to his thesis or argument when suddenly the narrator begins to make a sort of public service announcement. He says in Hebrews 2:1, "We must therefore pay even more attention to what we have heard." Before the author continues his argument, he is making sure his audience is truly listening to his message. So, why do we need to make sure that we are paying attention? Well, the author says in verse 1 that if we aren't paying attention to the message of Jesus, then we may drift away. If we neglect this gospel, how can we truly live as children of God? Like we talked about yesterday, angels were highly regarded among the Jewish people. And as we see in verse 2, in other places like Galatians 3:19 and Acts 7:53, God gave his law to the people of Israel through angels. Verses 2 and 3 say that if God's message spoken through angels held the weight in the eyes of the Jewish people and God, then how much more would the message spoken through his son hold? If the message of the Old Testament justified judgment, that there was disobedience, how much more will the message of the New Testament spoken through Jesus warrant gut judgment? We are called to place a deep anchor into Jesus himself so that we don't float away from his side. The second section in chapter 2 continues the argument that Jesus is exceedingly higher than the angels, but it does so by showcasing how he humbled himself. Philippians 2:5-8 says, "Adopt the same attitude as Christ, who, existing in the form of God, did not consider equality with God something to be exploited. Instead, he emptied himself by assuming the form of a servant, taking on the likeness of humanity. And when he had come as man, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross." Jesus took off the robe of righteousness to clothe himself in flesh. He humiliated himself to the point of death for you and me. Our sin was so great that a perfect sacrifice of blood was needed to fully atone us. Jesus didn't take on partial flesh. He didn't embody a portion of God. Jesus was fully God and took on the fullness of humanity. He lived a perfect life, enduring every kind of struggle and difficulty imaginable for you and for me. It is through Jesus that we gain salvation and sanctification. We are made clean through Jesus' death and get to see Jesus crowned with all glory and honor. He postured himself below the angels in order to carry our guilt and shame. He walked through literal death for our rescue and now is seated on the throne. Jesus became the greatest sacrifice. The sacrifices used prior to him were only temporary and minute in comparison to the gift of Jesus' sacrifice. It is through this very act that we are also made holy and pure. Not only are we purified through Jesus' sacrifice, but we are adopted into the family of God. Verse 11 says that Jesus is not ashamed to call us his brothers and sisters. We are brothers and sisters in the family of God. Romans 8:17 calls us co-heirs with Christ. This is our new identity, and this is the truth that we should fix our gaze upon. That is the place that we need to live our lives from. This is what the author of Hebrews wants us to understand. Today, we behold Jesus as our Savior and brother in the family of God. We pay attention to the message of the gospel. It is this message that frees us from slavery to fear of death. It is the action of love that was done to perfect our salvation. We stare at Jesus and acknowledge the humiliation that he endured on our behalf. He became lower than the angels for a period of time for us, for those that have wronged him over and over again. Through his sacrifice, we get to live in peace, knowing that we are cleansed. He went to the end for you and I because of his precious love. He became the high priest for us, our great helper in times of trouble. He endured every kind of adversity so that we would not be alone in our sufferings. We behold Jesus as our risen Savior, superior to all things. We behold the one who sacrificed it all.
Thank you so much for listening to today's episode of A Year in the Bible with Daily Grace. Don't forget to check out the show notes for helpful links and resources related to today's episode. And make sure you are following at Daily Grace Podcast on Instagram for more A Year in the Bible content, and at the Daily Grace Co. for all things Bible study resources. We can't wait to study again with you tomorrow. Bye, friends.